One of the most frequently asked questions I get on this channel is how do I get cinematic footage out of my camera? And there's a number of different components that go into getting cinematic footage out of any camera. But one bit of advice I was never able to give in the past, but I am today, is to get yourself a lens, which is the same type of lens that your favorite Hollywood movie was shot on. And this is a lens that was sent out to me for the purpose of making this video. It's not a paid or sponsored video, and all the opinions are my own. This is the most cinematic looking image that I've ever gotten out of a camera lens. And it wasn't that long ago that a lens like this would cost around $50,000 for a good one, or about $15,000 for a cheap one. But this lens can be had for only a few $100s. And the main difference between this lens and any other lens that you have probably used is it has a cylindrical or barrel element within the lens itself. But in practical terms, what does that do to our image quality? Well, it remains a 35mm lens, but the cylindrical element allows it to see wider than a typical 35mm lens. That means the image that you're actually getting is a 35mm lens and field of view this way, but it's around a 26mm field of view this way. This completely changes the way that your image looks, and it creates that sort of epic wide look that you get in Hollywood movies. The other thing it does is it gives you a widescreen field of view or effect. So if you go to the movies, you know that your TV is a certain shape, but then when you go watch a movie, you've got that widescreen effect. And if you watch something on Netflix or digital streaming on your normal TV, what you often see is you get these black bars at the top and bottom of the screen. That's because they're giving you the widescreen image and they're making it fit on your TV, which isn't a widescreen TV. This is going to give you that kind of image. Now, you can actually achieve a similar look with a typical cylindrical lens like this one. But what happens when you're doing that, you're actually capturing the image and you're chopping off the top. You're adding black bars and just throwing away some of the image. Because this lens actually takes a wider field of view and scrunches it all down to fit onto the sensor, you're still getting, if you're shooting a 4K image, you're still getting a 4K video. It's just coming in a different format. If you shoot with a lens like this and you crop it top and bottom with black bars, you actually don't have a 4K image anymore. You're not actually using all the pixels on your sensor. So this is going to allow you to get that wide field of view or that widescreen look, but you're still getting full resolution out of your camera. This type of lens is what's called an anamorphic lens, and anamorphic lenses aren't new by any means. They've been around since the early 1950s, and they've been used since then all the way up until today, going through film, and now they're used in digital imaging and digital movies as well. And some of the characteristics that you get out of an anamorphic lens would actually generally be considered optical flaws. And if we were looking at them on a cylindrical lens, we might even consider them undesirable. But what has happened is this type of look is so embedded in the way that we see all of our favorite movies that those optical flaws have become cinematic. They are what we expect from a big budget Hollywood movie. Now, one optical imperfection that this lens shares with the Hollywood lenses in all the movies that you've seen is that as you get to the very edge of the frame and you get that really wide field of view, you actually get some softening. And that's because that cylindrical element is stretching the image and it gets about to its most stretched on the very edges. This creates a little bit of softening. It's a little bit blurrier over there. So this is great for when you're trying to draw attention to the subject, a person or an object in the frame, because all you have to do is put them in the middle, sort of 2/3 of your image. And the edges just become a wraparound backdrop for what you've got clear and detailed in the center of frame. Now, another optical imperfection that this lens shares with $50,000 or $15,000 Hollywood anamorphic lenses is that it presents a bit of barrel distortion. And it wasn't until I started shooting with this lens and noticed this barrel distortion, but also liked this barrel distortion, that I started paying attention to my favorite movies. And now when I watch a number of my favorite movies, there is noticeable barrel distortion, this sort of anamorphic style barrel distortion in those movies. And in the past, it never triggered to me that it was even there. It wasn't until I started shooting with this lens and I noticed my footage started to match these other movies. And then I was looking at those movies and really taking a closer look of what the images looked like. And I found that they looked like what I was getting out of this lens. So once again, we have something that I think you would call an optical imperfection, but it is seen as cinematic and it actually looks quite good. The next thing you're gonna notice is the out of focus areas on an anamorphic lens like this, they look different. They're a little bit softer, and generally, particularly with specular highlights and bokeh, you're gonna get these oval shapes. And it's really unusual, and once again, this is something that I never noticed in my favorite Hollywood movies. This is the way the bokeh, this is the way the background blur looks. But it's something I really never noticed until I started shooting and testing this lens, and then was trying to figure out what looks so good about it. And then I started paying attention to, once again, what I'm seeing out of Hollywood. And yeah, you're seeing these sort of oval shaped specular highlights and this sort of interesting looking bokeh. And this lens is gonna give it to you, and it's gonna look just like something out of your favorite movie. Now, the other thing that this lens is gonna give you that looks just like something out of the Hollywood movies is anamorphic lens flare. And anamorphic lens flare are these blue streaks that go across the screen, across your image when light hits the lens. You have to be very careful with this and thoughtful about the way you're using it creatively. And this is the same way it is in Hollywood movies and the same way it is in these high-end $50,000 and $15,000 lenses. If you want to get those strong blue streaks across the screen, all you gotta do is point the lens straight into the light and they just go everywhere. It's kind of crazy. But depending on the type of scene you're shooting, you might not want to have that level of lens streak or lens flare. In that case, you just have to be thoughtful about the way that you're aiming the lens and the way that light is coming into the lens. So you will be able to play with these flares and blue streaks and create stronger ones or lighter ones depending on your composition and the way you're pointing the lens. But it is something you have to be mindful of because it is a huge creative part of the image that you're creating. It's something you don't generally have to think about with standard lenses, but you definitely do have to with this one. And once again, this is gonna make your images, this is gonna make your video footage look very, very much like what you've seen out of your favorite Hollywood movie. Now, I think it's important to point out there's a lot more that goes into creating a cinematic image than just putting an anamorphic lens on the end of your camera. And this isn't going to instantly make you a cinematographer or somebody who can shoot a movie, but this is going to take you one step down the track of making your images look more like something that's come out of your favorite Hollywood movie. Now, with this lens, it creates these incredible images. What are the disadvantages? Well, there are some disadvantages. And the first one is this cylindrical element in the lens. What it does is it actually squeezes the image together and fits it on your sensor. So you aren't actually getting a wide field of view when you pull the image straight out of your camera. What you're getting is you're getting all that stuff from the side squished together. So you've got this squished together tall image. To get your wide field of view, you have to what's called de-squeeze it in editing. Now, this isn't hard, it isn't fancy, but you do need to do this in editing, and it is an extra step that you don't have to do with sort of a typical standard cinema lens or your standard photography lens. The other thing that you're gonna notice is that squeezed together unusual image. In most cameras that you're gonna use this lens on, that's what it's gonna look like on the back of your camera. You're gonna get this kind of squished together weird looking image. Now, there are some cameras out there that will de-squeeze and give you the de-squeezed look or the proper sort of stretched out look on the back of the camera, which helps you with image composition. But if your camera doesn't have the ability to do that, you're going to get an unusual looking squished image on the back of your camera on the screen, and that can make it a little bit harder to compose your image. This can be easily gotten around by using an on-camera monitor, and all the popular on-camera monitors, even the cheap ones, the $150 ones that you can get nowadays, will allow you to de-squeeze that footage, so you're gonna get a real genuine look of what that is gonna look like once you bring it into your computer and de-squeeze it. And I think most people that would be wanting to shoot with a lens like this and create this kind of image quality really probably should be using an on-camera monitor anyways, because the screen on your camera is really not a great way to compose your images, and having something that's a little bit bigger just is a lot nicer to use, and it's gonna make it easier to compose your images. So I think if you're trying to get cinematic footage, you should be using at least a cheap on-camera monitor anyways. And the third thing is a look like this might not suit every single situation. So you might want to go out and shoot a birthday party and make it look like a cinematic video, but then again, you might not. So there are a lot of situations where having cinematic footage, this incredible looking footage, might not just suit the situation. And that could be sort of corporate, it could be sort of runaround style vlog stuff. Unless you're going to tailor the rest of the video to work in with this incredible anamorphic cinematic look, you might just end up with this thing that looks like it was shot with a Hollywood movie camera, but sounds and feels like it was shot with an iPhone. So you really have to, if you're going to use a lens like this, I think you have to think about the project as a whole and make it all match up. Otherwise, I think you're better off just shooting with a more standard spherical lens. There's a lot more that goes into creating a cinematic image than just buying a lens, but I do think this lens goes a long way towards getting that image quality that you're trying to match up with or live up to that you've seen out of Hollywood. So if somebody asks me what is the #1 lens that I would recommend for cinematic video footage, I am going to recommend the Sirui 35mm f1.8 anamorphic lens. And I will put some links in the description down below to all the different mirrorless mounts that it comes on and the current pricing.